At exactly 12:07 a.m., she would slip out of their bed. No words, no explanation, just the soft click of the door and her shadow disappearing down the hallway. He told himself it was nothing at first, but when it happened again the next night, and the night after that, something cold settled in his chest. The garage light would flicker on. Her silhouette would move behind the frosted glass. And sometimes, if he listened closely enough, he could swear he heard her voice, soft and tender, as if she was speaking to someone she loved. Hello, friends. Before we dive deeper, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Florida, United Kingdom, maybe South Africa, or Jamaica. We want to know. This is a story about trust, about the distance that can grow between two people sharing the same bed, and about how quickly doubt can poison even the strongest love. It's a story that might make you question what you think you know about the person sleeping next to you. And it's a story that asks a simple but haunting question. What would you do if the person you trusted most started keeping secrets in the middle of the night? Michael had been married to Grace for 27 years. 27 years of ordinary mornings and quiet evenings. 27 years of inside jokes and shared silences. They weren't the kind of couple that posted about their love on social media or renewed their vows on beaches. They were steady, predictable, the kind of love that didn't need to announce itself because it was woven into every small moment. He worked at a hardware store. She worked part-time at the library. Their daughter had moved out 3 years ago, leaving the house feeling too big and too quiet. But they had adjusted. At least, he thought they had. Until the midnight trip started. It began about 6 weeks ago. Michael woke up one night to use the bathroom and noticed Grace wasn't in bed. He assumed she couldn't sleep, maybe reading downstairs or making tea. But when he walked past the kitchen, it was dark. The only light came from the garage, seeping under the door like a secret. He stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob, but something stopped him. Maybe it was respect for her privacy. Maybe it was fear of what he might find. He went back to bed. The next morning, he almost asked her about it. But she was humming while making breakfast, something she hadn't done in years, and he didn't want to ruin her mood. So he said nothing. And that silence became the first crack. The trips continued. Every single night. Always at 12:07 a.m. He started pretending to be asleep, watching through barely open eyes as she carefully slid out from under the covers. She moved like someone who had practiced this, someone who knew exactly which floorboards creaked and how to avoid them. She would grab her phone from the nightstand, slip on her robe, and disappear. Michael would lie there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his mind filling the silence with possibilities he didn't want to consider. Was she talking to someone? Meeting someone? The garage had a side door that led to the driveway. She could leave without him ever knowing. He hated himself for thinking this way. Grace had never given him a reason to doubt her. But humans are strange creatures. We can know someone for decades and still be undone by a single unanswered question. During the day, Grace seemed lighter somehow. She smiled more, touched his arm when she passed him in the kitchen, started wearing that perfume he bought her years ago, but she claimed it made her sneeze. She was present, affectionate even. But at night, she belonged to the garage. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was planning a surprise for their anniversary, though that was still 4 months away. Maybe she was working on some craft project and didn't want him to see it yet. Maybe she just needed space, and he was being paranoid. But then he noticed other things. Small things that added up. She started keeping her phone face down. She changed her passcode, claiming she needed something easier to remember. When he casually mentioned maybe cleaning out the garage together one weekend, she tensed and quickly suggested they tackle the attic instead. These weren't the actions of someone with nothing to hide. Michael was a practical man. He had always believed that love was built on trust, and trust meant not questioning every unexplained moment. But he was also human, and humans break. One afternoon, he came home early from work, claiming he had a headache. Grace was at the library. He stood in the driveway, staring at the garage door. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment he would either confirm his fears or prove himself a fool. He punched in the code on the keypad, and the door slowly rolled up. Inside was mostly what he expected. Old boxes, holiday decorations, his workbench covered in dust. But in the corner, partially covered by a tarp, was something that made him freeze. It was a shape, large, rectangular, and next to it, on a small folding table, was Grace's laptop, open and glowing faintly in the dim light. He took a step forward, then stopped. Because what if he was wrong? What if he looked and found something innocent, and Grace came home to discover he had violated her trust? What would that say about him? About them? He stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then he backed out, closed the door, and went inside to lie on the couch with his headache that was now very real. That night, he couldn't pretend anymore. When Grace slipped out of bed at 12:07, Michael waited exactly 3 minutes. Then he followed. He moved slowly, carefully, the way she did. Down the hallway, through the kitchen. He could see the light under the garage door, brighter now, almost harsh. He pressed his ear against the wood. At first, nothing. Then he heard her voice. Soft, tender. She was talking to someone. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the voice she used to use with their daughter when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. Gentle, reassuring, full of love. His stomach turned. He reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. But before he could turn it, he heard something that stopped him cold. Grace laughed. Not a guilty laugh. Not a nervous laugh. But a pure, joyful sound he hadn't heard from her in years. And then silence. The kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Michael stood frozen, his hand still on the doorknob, his heart breaking and mending and breaking again. He couldn't do it. He couldn't open that door. Not yet. So he crept back to bed and lay there, staring into the darkness, until Grace returned 20 minutes later and curled up beside him, smelling faintly of motor oil and something sweet he couldn't identify. The next morning, Michael was different. He couldn't hide it anymore. Grace noticed immediately. She asked if he was feeling okay. He said he was fine. She asked if something was bothering him. He said no, but his voice was flat. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. He left for work without kissing her goodbye, something he had done every single day for 27 years. Grace stood in the doorway watching his truck pull away, and for the first time, doubt crept into her own heart. Had he figured it out? Was he angry? She had been so careful, so patient. She only had 2 more weeks until everything would be ready. 2 more weeks, and she could finally show him what she had been working on, what she had sacrificed for. But now, seeing the distance in his eyes, she wondered if she had waited too long. If silence, even with the best intentions, could be its own kind of betrayal. That evening, they moved around each other like strangers. Michael made dinner. Grace set the table. They ate in near silence, the scrape of forks against plates the only sound. When Grace reached across the table to touch his hand, he pulled away. Not dramatically, just a subtle withdrawal. But it might as well have been a chasm. Grace's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. And Michael felt a surge of anger he couldn't quite justify, because how could he be angry at her for something he wouldn't even confront her about? That night, when the clock hit midnight, Michael was wide awake. He watched Grace check her phone, slip out of bed, grab her robe. But this time, instead of heading to the garage, she stopped at the bedroom door. She turned back to look at him, and in the faint light from the hallway, he could see her face clearly. She looked tired, sad, and older somehow, as if the weight of her secret was aging her in real time. For a moment, he thought she was going to say something, but she just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, as if deciding something important. Then she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. Tomorrow night. Please trust me until tomorrow night. And then she was gone. Michael lay there, her words echoing in his mind. Please trust me. When had she ever given him a reason not to? When had he become the kind of man who doubted before listening, who assumed before asking? The shame settled over him like a heavy blanket. But beneath the shame was still that nagging doubt. Because what if tomorrow night, the truth was worse than anything he had imagined? What if trust wasn't enough? The next day moved like honey. Slow, thick, suffocating. Michael called in sick to work. Grace requested the day off from the library. They spent the morning in different rooms, both of them waiting for night to fall. Around noon, Grace made sandwiches. They ate together at the kitchen table, still not quite looking at each other. Then Grace said something that broke Michael's heart. I've never doubted you. Not once in 27 years. Even when I had reasons to wonder, I chose to trust you. I chose to believe that whatever you were doing, wherever you were, it came from a place of love. Her voice cracked on that last word. Michael finally looked at her, really looked at her, and he saw what he had been too afraid to see before. She wasn't hiding guilt. She was carrying hope. She wasn't sneaking around. She was protecting something precious. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry. I should have asked. I should have trusted you. Grace squeezed his fingers. You will. Tonight, you will. And maybe that's what matters. That we find our way back. Michael nodded. Tears he didn't know he was capable of any more sliding down his cheeks. Tonight then, at 11:30 p.m., Grace stood up from the couch where they had been watching television in tense silence. She held out her hand to Michael. Come with me. He took her hand, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. She led him through the kitchen to the garage door. She paused, her hand on the knob. This is for you. It's always been for you. She opened the door and flipped on the lights. Michael stepped inside and stopped breathing. In the center of the garage, polished and gleaming like new, was his motorcycle. The 1973 Triumph Bonneville he had sold 14 years ago to pay for their daughter's college tuition. The bike he had loved since he was 17. The bike he told Grace was fine to sell, even though they both knew it broke something in him to let it go. But this wasn't just the same model. This was his actual bike. Grace had somehow tracked it down, bought it back, and spent the last 6 weeks restoring it. Every night at 12:07, she had been out here with YouTube tutorials and borrowed tools, teaching herself how to rebuild an engine, how to re-chrome parts, how to bring something dead back to life. On the workbench was a small speaker, still playing a video of a mechanic explaining carburetor adjustments. Next to it was a notebook filled with Grace's handwriting, questions and notes and sketches. And hanging from the handlebars was a banner that read, "For the man who gave up his dreams, so ours could come true." Michael couldn't speak. He walked slowly to the bike, running his hand over the seat, the chrome, the engine. It was perfect, better than he remembered. He turned to Grace, who was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. I wanted to give you back something you lost for us. I wanted you to feel seen. Michael crossed the garage in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms. I'm so sorry. I doubted you. I let fear poison what we have. Grace held him tighter. We're human. We make mistakes, but we also make things right. They stood there, in the garage that had become a shrine to patience and love, holding each other like they hadn't in years. And Michael understood something fundamental. Trust isn't the absence of doubt. It's the choice to believe anyway. It's the decision to wait for the truth instead of rushing to judgment. Grace had spent 6 weeks keeping a secret, and in his impatience, Michael had almost destroyed the gift she was preparing. Because that's what happens when we assume. When we let our fears write the story before the truth has a chance to speak. We don't uncover betrayal. We create it. We take something beautiful and we taint it with suspicion. And sometimes, we lose what we were too afraid to trust. Michael looked at his wife, at the woman who had spent countless midnights covered in grease and frustration, learning something completely foreign to her, all to give him back a piece of himself. And he made a promise, to listen before assuming, to ask before accusing, to remember that silence isn't always secrecy. Sometimes it's just love gathering itself to speak. What would you have done? Would you have waited, or would you have followed? Would you have trusted, or would you have doubted? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, reminded you that patience and trust are the foundations of love, then subscribe to our channel. Because every week, we bring you stories about real people, real struggles, and the quiet lessons that change everything when we're finally willing to listen. Thank you for watching. And remember, the greatest gifts often come wrapped in silence. Don't tear them open too soon.